The enigmatic tale of a 7th Cavalry soldier unfolds, revealing a hidden truth behind Custer's fateful last stand. In the grand narrative of American history, few events echo as profoundly as the Battle of Little Bighorn, where General George Custer met his tragic end. Amid the many accounts of bravery and loss, one soldier's story stands shrouded in mystery. Enter Frank Finkel, a man who claimed to have narrowly escaped death during this infamous clash. His tale, long a subject of skepticism and intrigue, has recently garnered fresh attention as emerging evidence sheds new light on his extraordinary account. Before diving into this compelling story, remember to like and subscribe to stay connected with our community. Between 1876 and the late 1920s, approximately 70 individuals stepped forward claiming to be the sole survivor of Little Bighorn. These stories often fell into three familiar patterns: disguising themselves as Native Americans, concealing themselves within the carcasses of animals, or being spared by the mercy of a chief's compassionate daughter. Yet one narrative stood apart for its potential authenticity, that of Frank Finkel. Claiming to be the lone survivor of General George Armstrong Custer's final stand on June 25, 1876, Finkel's story gained recognition in his later years and continued to spark debate even after his death. Historians have wrestled with the veracity of his claims, as his account offered details only a first-hand witness could provide, though not without inconsistencies. Born in January 1854 in Washington County, Ohio, Frank Finkel was the third child of German immigrants Peter and Magdalena Finkel. By the 1860 U.S. Census, the Finkels' modest farm, valued at $500, reflected the era's typical family life. Over time, the family surname evolved from the German Finkel to the more Americanized Finkel, which Frank retained throughout his life. Peter and Magdalena had 6 sons and a daughter, and though German was the household language, Frank became fluent in English and a proficient reader. After Peter's death in 1868, the older sons, including Frank, left the family farm, which could no longer support so many workers, to seek opportunities elsewhere. In January 1872, facing hard times in Chicago, Frank made a decision common among young men of the era. Too proud to beg and too honest to steal, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. For native-born Americans like Frank, enlisting was often a last resort when other options were exhausted. Many recruits adopted false names, but Frank went further, choosing an identity that might command respect and open doors. He renamed himself August Finkel, claimed Berlin, Prussia as his birthplace, and listed his occupation as a clerk. In the aftermath of Prussia's victory over Louis Napoleon and the French Republic the previous year, Prussian soldiers were widely admired, a fact Frank astutely leveraged. Adopting his new persona, Frank maintained his birth date of January 23rd, but adjusted his age from 18 to 27. He entertained fellow soldiers with fabricated tales of his service as an officer in the Prussian army. His commanding stature, over 6 feet tall, combined with dark hair, gray eyes, and impressive linguistic abilities, helped him quickly rise through the ranks to sergeant within 2 years. By 1876, he had achieved the rank of second sergeant in Captain Tom Custer's C Company of the 7th Cavalry, a unit renowned for its high morale and unwavering loyalty to the Custer brothers. C Company, known for its distinctive style, was one of 5 units that pooled their funds to purchase stylish hats from a Chicago retailer, rejecting the standard-issue Andrews hats that gave them a buccaneer-like appearance. This decision sparked controversy with George Custer, facing criticism from the Post-Trader, who accused him of undermining the military's corrupt supply system. The Post-Trader monopoly, rife with exploitation, charged soldiers exorbitant prices for goods while skimming profits from supplies meant for Native Americans. Meanwhile, Native Americans received superior firearms, such as the 1866 Henry repeating rifles, which were included in cash annuities and valued at $75. Far more effective than the single-shot Springfields issued to U.S. troops. These policies left Native Americans better armed, yet deliberately impoverished, driving many to join the Sioux under Sitting Bull after the U.S. government attempted to force the sale of the Black Hills in 1875. The Sioux's refusal ignited tensions that led to open conflict. As the situation escalated, George Custer maneuvered his way back into the campaign against the Sioux after exposing the corruption of the post-trader system in Washington. The 7th Cavalry, including 2nd Sergeant Frank Finkel and Captain Tom Custer's C Company, was dispatched as part of a three-pronged offensive against the so-called hostiles. Their mission would culminate in one of the most iconic and controversial battles in American history, setting the stage for Frank Finkel's remarkable, yet contentious, tale of survival. Departing from Fort Abraham, Lincoln and Dakota Territory, George Custer made the fateful decision to decline offers of 3 Gatling guns, a 3-inch Rodman cannon, and 2 companies of the 2nd Cavalry, his first Civil War regiment. While Custer's confidence in his plan seemed unwavering, the mood in C Company told a different story. Tom Custer, George's brother, reportedly showed signs of unease before the battle, while his second-in-command, Lieutenant H.M. Harrington, was haunted by recurring nightmares of being captured and tortured by Native Americans. First Sergeant Edwin Bobo, anticipating the worst, purchased a mail-order .22 caliber pistol, but ultimately left it behind. As C Company approached Little Bighorn, they encountered a grim omen, a white man's scalp displayed on a pole. Jeremiah Finley, an Irish-born Civil War veteran and staunch Custer loyalist, retrieved the scalp, possibly intending to provide it a proper burial. Tensions among the men were palpable. Among them was Frank Finkel, struggling to keep pace due to his considerable height and weight, which burdened his horse. Sergeant Daniel Knipe later recalled in 1924, "I was riding near Sergeant Finkel, close to Captain Tom Custer. Finkel shouted that his horse was failing and he couldn't keep up. I urged him on, saying, 'Come on, Finkel, if you can.' He lagged behind. Finkel's inability to keep up saved his life. Had he remained with the company, he likely would have been ordered to help transport the ammunition-laden train. Knipe, who took on this task, became one of the last men to see the Custer brothers alive before retreating with the mules carrying 24,000 rounds of ammunition. Finkel, left behind with his struggling horse, followed C Company as they advanced toward the river. Upon reaching the Little Bighorn, George Custer halted and organized his forces into 3 defensive positions. C Company, including Finkel and Tom Custer, established themselves on what would later be called Calhoun Hill, overlooking the Hunkpapa village. The Native Americans, who had spent the previous night engaged in festive courtship dances, were suddenly alerted when 2 inexperienced soldiers blundered into their village and opened fire before being unhorsed and killed. Simultaneously, Major Marcus Reno launched an attack from the opposite side of the camp. The warriors, armed with superior repeating rifles sold by corrupt post-traders, quickly emerged from their lodges. The 7th Cavalry, outnumbered 10-1, soon realized the extent of their disadvantage. According to Finkel's later accounts, the troopers were ordered to mount their horses. During the chaos, a bullet struck the butt of Finkel's Springfield carbine, causing the steel barrel to hit his forehead with brutal force. He sustained additional wounds, a shot to the leg, another to his side, while his horse's bridle was severed and the animal itself was grazed by gunfire. As the remaining members of C Company, including Finkel, attempted to flee, they were swept into the charging ranks of native warriors. Finkel, unable to control his panicked horse, was carried down the hill and through the Hunkpapa camp at the base of Calhoun Hill. Rain in the Face, a prominent native warrior, later recounted an unusual sight, a lone rider fleeing past the lodges, his fate discussed by the women after the battle. Finkel managed to evade immediate capture, though others were less fortunate. Corporal John Foley of C Company, for instance, broke through the encirclement only to be pursued by 3 young warriors armed with bows. When Foley realized they were out of arrows, panic overtook him, and he fatally shot himself. As many as 8 C Company soldiers may have initially escaped, only to be hunted down and killed far from the main battlefield. Years later, Crow Scouts discovered 6 skeletons still wearing 7th Cavalry gear, but the Army never officially investigated the findings. Among the survivors, Trooper Nathan Short traveled over 20 miles to the Rosebud River before collapsing and dying alongside his horse. Others, like Sergeant Finley, met grimmer ends. Finley's body was found with 12 arrows embedded in it, a testament to the relentless violence of the battle. Meanwhile, less resolute soldiers either fled in panic or reportedly took their own lives rather than face capture. First Sergeant Bobo, his horse slain, made a courageous but doomed march back toward Custer Hill to join the last stand. He fell in the Keogh sector, alongside Tom Custer, who perished with his brothers George and Boston, their nephew Audie Reed, and brother-in-law Lieutenant James Calhoun. Finkel, dazed and gravely injured, clung to his horse, a sorrel that carried him across the plains. Over the next day and night, he crossed the branches of Tulloch's Creek, later describing them in geographical detail verified by 20th century research. The northern branch was fresh and sweet, while the southern branches were tainted with alkali. Eventually, he reached the Yellowstone and Rosebud River Junction. With his horse too weak to continue, Finkel ended its suffering with a single pistol shot. In August of that year, Lieutenant Edward Godfrey of the 7th Cavalry documented the death of a cavalry horse, though the report's details, identifying the horse as a sorrel from C Company, remained undisclosed until decades later. Another officer, Sergeant Canopy, later reported finding Finley's mutilated remains. The grim discovery included Finley's body pierced with arrows, lying beside his horse, a haunting reminder of the slaughter at Little Bighorn. For 2 days, the battlefield bore the scars of unrelenting violence. The squaws, following the fight, mutilated fallen soldiers with tomahawks and arrows before stripping them of their garments. Among the carnage and chaos, Finkel's survival remains an enduring enigma, his journey a solitary thread in the bloody tapestry of one of history's most infamous battles. Although Canopy claimed to have seen Finkel, he never located Finkel's horse or provided a persuasive explanation for how he could have identified a decomposed corpse after 2 days of sweltering heat exceeding 100 degrees. Finkel's closest friend, Sergeant Charles Windolph, a survivor of the Reno Hill battle, returned to the battlefield specifically to search for Finkel's body, but reported finding no trace of him. Meanwhile, Finkel himself wandered through the wilderness until he stumbled upon a white man chopping wood outside a remote shack. Startled by Finkel's uniform, the man initially threatened him at gunpoint, but eventually relented and assisted him when he collapsed from exhaustion. Inside the rudimentary cabin, Finkel encountered another man, pale and gaunt from tuberculosis, lying on a crude bed. The healthier man, identified only as Bill, and his companion took turns nursing Finkel back to health. After probing the wound in his leg with a pine splinter, they applied hot pitch, causing him to lose consciousness. When Finkel awoke, he discovered that the gash on his side had been treated with bear grease and had stopped bleeding. Over the following weeks, Bill cared for Finkel, and Finkel in turn helped Bill tend to his dying friend. When the man eventually passed away, Finkel and Bill buried him with a simple marker before parting ways. Although the two claimed to be trappers, Finkel later noted the absence of traps around the cabin, suggesting they were more likely gun runners or whiskey traders. Cautious of his status as a potential deserter, given Custer's 1867 order to shoot deserters, which had led to his own court-martial and suspension, Finkel learned that his entire company had perished at the Battle of Little Bighorn. His name appeared near the bottom of the casualty list in the Bismarck Tribune. Officially declared dead, Finkel may have decided to leave his military life behind. He later confided to his wife that he had tried to claim a discharge, but was unable to provide the required witnesses, a possible cover for avoiding charges of desertion. After leaving the Army, Finkel spent a year working in the dairy business in St. Louis, later traveling to California before settling in Dayton, Washington. Despite limited resources, he utilized his carpentry and farming skills to speculate in land, building and selling farms with considerable success. In 1886, near his birthday, Finkel married Delia Rainwater, the daughter of prominent Dayton farmer and civic leader Jacob Rainwater. On their wedding night, Delia noticed an old gunshot wound on Finkel's side. He explained it was from a fight with Native Americans, but did not disclose where the altercation occurred. Years later, a surgeon removed the bullet when it worked its way to the surface. Throughout the 1890s, Finkel expanded his farming ventures and gradually altered the spelling of his last name from Finkel to Finkel. Public records, including lot numbers and Delia's name, confirmed his identity. By 1920, three of the couple's four children were grown, including Ben, who served in the Idaho legislature. The family was well regarded and financially comfortable in Dayton. In April 1920, during a game of horseshoes, Finkel revealed his long-held secret, possibly emboldened by a few drinks. After a neighbor mentioned Custer's ill-fated encounter with Native Americans, Finkel retorted, "You don't know what you're talking about." When pressed on how he knew so much, he admitted, "Because I was there." The confession led to an invitation to speak at the Dayton Kiwanis Club, where he recounted his experience at the Battle of Little Bighorn. His story was published in a local newspaper on April 8, 1920. Despite skepticism, those who knew Finkel believed his account. However, inconsistencies in his narrative raised doubts. For instance, he claimed to have enlisted in 1872, a year after the Franco-Prussian War, though no corroborating record supported this. Finkel spent much of his life in Dayton, surrounded by a thriving German-American community. However, anti-German sentiment during World War I led to increased scrutiny of his identity. Finkel's second wife, Hermie, whom he married in 1926, supported his claims but avoided associating him with August Finkel, listed as born in Berlin, Prussia. She maintained that he had enlisted under the name Frank Hall, a man with entirely different physical characteristics and a history of desertion from the 7th Cavalry in 1875. Despite this, Hermie appeared jealous of Finkel's first wife, Delia, who she claimed had been unaware of Finkel's military history, an assertion contradicted by Delia's obituary, which acknowledged his survival of the Custer massacre. After Frank's death in 1930, Hermie devoted herself to preserving his legacy as the sole survivor of Little Bighorn, contacting government officials and historians for recognition. However, her efforts were hampered by doubts surrounding Finkel's identity. Critics argued that Finkel's survival story was undermined by conflicting accounts, including discrepancies in his name and enlistment history. Nonetheless, key details from Finkel's story aligned with independent reports. Sergeant Charles Windolph, a Medal of Honor recipient, confirmed he had searched for Finkel's body after the battle, but failed to find it. Rain in the Face, a Hunkpapa warrior, also spoke of a lone white man fleeing past their camp. Decades later, a detailed study of C Company's dispersal lent further credibility to Finkel's account, suggesting that survivors could only have emerged from that unit. Despite the lingering controversies, Finkel's tale remains a poignant chapter in the lore of the Battle of Little Bighorn, reflecting the complexities of truth, memory, and survival in the aftermath of one of America's most storied conflicts. "We were better armed than those with single-shot rifles," Rain in the Face recounted. "The ejector wouldn't clear the empty cartridges, so their guns wouldn't fire more than once. It was like slaughtering sheep. Some begged on their knees. We spared none." This harrowing testimony lends credibility to the possibility of a survivor like Frank Finkel, who escaped the massacre by navigating through the chaos of Indian lines and defying impossible odds. Rather than acknowledging Rain in the Face's detailed account, Hermie attempted to link Finkel to a white horse in a dubious Indian narrative. This not only ignored Rain in the Face's credible description of Finkel's escape, but also included claims of spotting Finkel in Chicago, a notion that detracted from the authenticity of the story. Finkel himself maintained that his horse was a roan, specifically a sorrel from C Company. His intimate knowledge of the terrain impressed topographer Charles Coleman, who verified distances with 3 separate instruments and found Finkel's descriptions remarkably accurate. Finkel's authenticity was further supported by his use of genuine old Army slang, the presence of gunshot wounds, and his disciplined, military demeanor, all consistent with a man who had fought at Little Bighorn. Despite being officially declared dead and allegedly buried among the fallen, no definitive evidence ever identified Finkel's remains. What set Finkel apart was the way he described the battle, not in the romanticized tones of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but in a stark and raw manner consistent with survivors' accounts, such as those of Captain Frederick Benteen, and corroborated by Native American perspectives from the 1870s. This realistic portrayal found further validation in Dr. Richard Fox's 1980s analysis, which confirmed the chaotic retreat of C Company. His findings showed how the unit fragmented under attack, leaving bodies strewn across the battlefield, with at least one fugitive escaping the carnage. While Hermie Finkel may have confused historians with her dubious name games, Frank Finkel's story aligns with the evidence. He was indeed a survivor of Custer's last stand. The world at that time, eager to justify expansion, celebrate Custer, and vilify the Native Americans, was not ready for such a narrative of survival against the odds. Finkel's account, though overshadowed by skepticism and historical bias, endures as a testament to one man's extraordinary escape. Stay tuned for more videos that explore first-hand accounts of historic battles. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay connected, and I'll see you in the next episode.